Anyway, I want to welcome all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to participants all over the world. I'm Eva Richter from the Poverty Elimination and Community Education Foundation and the NGO Committee on Migration, and I want to welcome you to our very distinguished panel on the policy responses to COVID-19 and violence against women in migration. Our distinguished panelists will speak for about 10 minutes each to present their observations, and their presentations will be followed by a question and answer period. Please use the function under Reactions at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. You will be recognized in order and unmuted by our host, Marides Santos. Please be brief, 1 minute only for your questions. You may also post a question or a comment in the chat box. It is an honor to have Leslie Irway-Wright as our moderator for this session. She has been working with NGOs at the UN for over 20 years, concentrating on issues affecting women and girls. Her primary accomplishments include representation annually to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, the organizing sessions of the Sustainable Development Goals, the special session for the review of the Beijing Fourth World Conference on Women, the special session on children, and the special session on HIV/AIDS. She was formerly the chair of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women, the first vice president of the Conference of NGOs, and the International UN Committee chair for Zonta International. Currently, she is the charter president of the Zonta Club of Brooklyn, New York. Recently, she was a peer leader of a group of researchers and writers that created the section on freedom from violence, stigma, and stereotyping, part of a compilation of teaching materials in the online Women's Human Rights Teaching, Learning, and Advocacy resource. Last fall, she assisted with the organization of an online 3-day conference on COVID-19 and domestic violence. Leslie holds a BA and 2 master's degrees, and she lives in Brooklyn. It is my honor to present Leslie Wright.
Well, Eva, thank you very much for that warm introduction. And I thank the NGO Committee on Migration, the Peace Foundation, and VIVAT International for sponsoring and organizing this event. Today, we will hear 4 perspectives. We are still expecting one more presenter on the effect that COVID-19 has had on violence against women migrants, offering some policy perspectives for consideration. As you are aware, we have 90 minutes for the entire program, so speakers have been asked to keep their remarks to no more than 10 minutes to allow some time for discussion before we end. Unlike our face-to-face parallel events from the past, we will be cut off at the end of our time to allow the next event to begin. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Honorable Fernando de la Mora Salceda, Coordinator for Economic, Social, Human Rights, and Humanitarian Affairs for the Mission of Mexico to the UN. We are still waiting for Sigma Huda, who is best known internationally as the first special rapporteur on trafficking in persons. She served from 2004 to 2008. She was also the founder and former president of the Bangladesh National Women Lawyers Association and co-founder and former chair of the Acid Survivors Foundation. Wen Lee, who is the director of the Department of International Cooperation and Partnerships from IOM, the International Organization for Migration, and Raquel Verdasco, who is a human rights lawyer and project technician of Jesuit Refugee Service in Athens, Greece. I will be introducing each of the speakers in turn, but first, to set the stage, I have a few comments. During the ECE, or the Economic Commission for Europe and North America consultation for Beijing Plus 25, that was held in Geneva in 2019, it became evident to the participants that the issue of migrant women was intersectional and included female refugees, undocumented workers, trafficked women, women on the move, as well as children of migrant women. Their faces, conditions, ages, ethnicities, and their status all contributed to this intersectionality. All agreed that migrant women faced myriad problems: racism, discrimination, legal challenges, exploitation, poverty, and of course, violence. Because of their unequal citizenship, their human rights were often violated. They faced barriers in accessing basic services and were often attacked, either physically or economically. These were among the findings of the consultation held in 2019 So with the advent of COVID-19, what could be expected? Even as migrants are recognized more than ever as essential, they are among the hardest hit by the pandemic. Migrant workers are still being denied the pillars of decent work, fair wages, the right to social protection, occupational safety and health, and other protections. The pandemic has exposed the weaknesses in temporary labor migration programs that treat migrant workers as disposable. Countries that counted on the remittances from migrant workers found their resources dwindling. Families that counted on the same found their resources shrinking as well. Finding themselves unemployed, migrants began to move again, seeking other forms of employment. Many tried to make their way home. Last week, the New York Times noted the situation of Nepal, for example. Millions of laborers from Nepal work abroad, often as cooks, cleaners, maids, guards, and nannies in India or the Middle East, they said. In 2019, Nepal earned $8.25 billion from foreign remittances. But with most of the world's economies hurting, that remittance stream has also dwindled, putting a damper on Nepal's economy. Economic conditions and national instability have led to large migrations of people looking for a better, safer life situation. Large migrations have alarmed countries of destination, which in turn have increased restrictions on those desiring to relocate. Some countries have taken the step to repatriate migrants, at times against their will. Xenophobia among citizens has increased, sometimes leading to increased violence. Close living quarters for migrants and refugees, often without proper facilities or resources, have led to violent situations among the migrants, and exploitation has led to increased child marriage, bondage, selling children, and especially for girls, trafficking. Such conditions have also increased the spread of COVID-19. The national responses appear to be individualized. Each country approaches its own situation and responds to the challenges at hand. We will hear from our speakers about what they see and what policies might make the best practice, as well as how these approaches can protect the human rights of women migrants. So now let us turn to the speakers, and our first speaker is Fernando de la Mora. Fernando is the Coordinator for Economic, Social, Human Rights, and Humanitarian Affairs at the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations, where he oversees work in the second and third committees of the General Assembly. He's a career diplomat in the Mexican Foreign Service, having served as consul in Texas and Arizona, as director for interinstitutional affairs of the Instituto Matias Romero, Mexico's diplomatic academy. In New York, he served on the co-facilitation team of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, which was adopted in 2018. He's participated in multiple negotiations in the General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, and several intergovernmental conferences. He holds degrees in international relations from the University of British Columbia, and in the United States, legal studies from the University of New Mexico. He's lectured in international conflict resolution and conflict management, and his publications have centered on issues of international refugee and migrant protection, public diplomacy, human security, and multilateral negotiations. Fernando is currently an associate of the Mexican Council of International Affairs and a governing member of the Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection. Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and dear colleagues. Good morning. Welcome to CSW. I think first, congratulations for being able to successfully navigate the platform to get us here. Secondly, because I come from a country with a feminist foreign policy, it's a pleasure to be the only man on the panel, because if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I hope that I can help setting the stage a little bit for our discussion today, where really what I'm interested in is also hearing from you. So I've been asked to speak a bit about what the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration says and can contribute with regards to sexual and gender-based violence against migrant women, and some of the tendencies that we've seen since the adoption of the GCM, but also very important heading up to the International Migration Review Forum in 2022. And these are some of the things that governments have in mind. I think the first point I would make is that unlike many other documents, the Global Compact for Migration doesn't exclusively see women and girls as victims, but recognizes them also as agents of change. This has become evident because migration is one of the issues where we actually have gender parity. Fully half of migrants around the world are women. And so we cannot understand the migration phenomenon without understanding the specific challenges that women face in different contexts. But in many cases, they fall victims to sexual and gender-based violence and other forms of violence, including some of the ones that were mentioned, like xenophobia and racism. And yet, in other cases, we also see how migrant women are effectively agents of change. It's very clear in many cases, for example, by opening the banking sector to women and allowing them to send and to receive remittances. There are many countries where there's certain communities, Mexico included, where a majority of the current population is currently women who are receiving remittances. So they're not migrants themselves, but the affectation that migration has on them is that they become heads of household. They expand into public life. They take care of this financial management, and the remittance receiving family becomes a tool for empowerment that allows for businesses to open and for women to participate in spheres where they may not traditionally participate. So the Global Compact calls for a review of national labor laws, employment policies and programs. And this is particularly important for those women migrant workers who may be in the informal sector or may have precarious employment. But in doing the analysis and in doing the negotiations, one of the things that we found was that women were particularly likely to become victims of human trafficking in cases where the work visa that they had was linked specifically to only one employer. This enabled the employer, a single employer, to engage in practices such as confiscation of a passport and therefore prevent the worker from acceding to protections that they might otherwise have under the law. So the single employer linkage to the visa is one of the things that was not necessarily recognized as a good practice, so to speak, in the Global Compact. And what is encouraged is that those work schemes, those employment policies allow for an employee, a migrant worker, to transfer from one employee to another in accordance with national legislation. But making a single employer responsible also exacerbates these risks. And we've seen very good practices coming out of different parts of the world where those employment schemes for visas have become more flexible. And what we hope to see in the coming months is evidence that that has also decreased in terms of human trafficking. There's an entire objective in the Global Compact related to vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities can fundamentally be addressed sometimes in three ways when it comes to migrant women workers. Sometimes it's information, and this is the prevention piece. Providing information to the migrant workers, making sure that they are aware of what their rights and obligations are. Many times, intermediaries may not provide the full information that is owed to women migrant workers. And so it is the responsibility of governments, and ideally working together, not only the government of the country of destination, but the country of origin, to also provide their citizens with information about their rights. As you may know, Mexico has the largest consular network of any one country in a single country, which is 50 consulates in the United States, owing to our 11 million population in the United States. And in each of these consulates, efforts are made to proactively educate women about their labor rights, but also about their legal rights when it comes to denouncing things like domestic violence, which is very prevalent in many migrant communities. And so it's an example of partnerships between governments and countries in destination, but also governments in countries of origin, and really using the consular diplomacy function as another tool for empowerment of women and girls that many countries have also began to replicate. But sometimes information is not enough. Sometimes assistance is truly required, and the Global Compact provides some guidance on what are some tools that can be used for assistance to migrants in situations of vulnerability. And what's unique about this is that the Global Compact takes on board not only gender responsiveness as one of its core guiding principles, but it recognizes that there's multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and therefore of vulnerabilities. It's not the same to be a migrant student on a visa than to be undocumented, or to be in precarious employment, or to also happen to be indigenous or young or old or from a minority group, or to not speak the language, or migrants with disabilities. These are multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. And what we've learned is that the appropriate policy responses need to take a holistic perspective and recognize all of these potential vulnerabilities at their intersection in order to provide the right empowerment. And when assistance isn't enough, what's required is protection. Everyone is entitled to recognition under the law as a person in accordance with the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And having legal regimes that effectively recognize women and men, migrant workers on equal footing is fundamental. One of the good things that we've seen already in the past year is that the trust fund for migration, the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund, which is what's set up to implement the Global Compact along with the UN Network for Migration, has began several projects that are all gender responsive. So it's, again, impossible to conceive of making migration safe, orderly, and regular if you do not take into account the specific needs of migrant women. So I think we also need to address, in the context of the pandemic, what has happened. And I think some of our other speakers will be able to speak to the vulnerabilities and the trends of what has happened in places of detention or in close quarters in the case of refugee camps. But I believe that migrants overall are actually the unsung heroes of the pandemic. These are in so many cases, the essential workers. Such a high percentage of healthcare workers in the OECD countries are migrants. Those of us that live in New York, I think anyone that has ordered takeout in the last year has had an interaction with a migrant worker. These are essential in every sense. But when it comes to women migrants, we have seen across the world, the same as with women overall, an increase in domestic violence as a result of the lockdowns. And so when the problem is at home, the vulnerability for migrant women and girls may be that they do not have easy access to protection in some cases because they may fear deportation as a result of reporting the abuse. And so in many countries, firewalls have been established either formally or informally to try to separate public safety from migration status. No one should fear removal as a result of reporting a crime. And reporting a crime makes everyone safer, upholds the rule of law, and is not the same as being in a country in an irregular status. Because as you know, many people can actually flip in and out of irregular status as a result of legislative changes and administrative procedures. So maybe just to finish up, because I'm very interested, as I said, to learn from you, to hear from you, um, to share with you that the continuum of sexual and gender-based violence in the case of women migrants needs to be seen also in the context of the migration cycle, from pre-departure to transit to arrival to return. We need to recognize that there is a tendency for sexual and gender-based violence to actually be a driver of migration as well. We see this with the LGBTQI community in some countries where their lives are threatened by transnational organized crime and other criminal elements. And in some cases, they become asylum seekers, and in others, they migrate for the purposes of staying safe. During transit, the transit process is extremely vulnerable for women migrants because they are exponentially more likely to be trafficked, particularly for sexual purposes, but also it's where the interaction between human trafficking and migrant smuggling really takes hold. And it's important to distinguish the two phenomenon, because one is a crime against a person, the other is a crime against the state, and there's a reason why we have two separate protocols. But this doesn't mean that the two phenomena don't interact and intersect. And some of the cases that we've seen in many parts of the world is sex being used as payment for the smuggler. And when sex is coerced, it is a form of trafficking. And that person deserves protection in accordance with international refugee law, and of course in accordance with both the Global Compact for Refugees and the Global Compact for Migration. Same can be said upon arrival and the vulnerabilities that are well known, but also upon return. The pandemic has seen millions of migrants return home voluntarily and otherwise, many times facing vulnerabilities that were unexpected because the infrastructure is not there to receive them. But we cannot forget the obligation of states under international law to duly readmit returning nationals. The question is, upon return, will they be displaced? Will they be faced with more violence? Or will we be able to create the conditions for them to be sustainably there? So I think with the amount of expertise that's on this panel and in the audience, I see many familiar names that have been champions of the human rights of migrants for many years. I think I will leave it there and just say that the key solution to this, it really lies in partnerships between governments, civil society, and academia, and also governments, not just at the global and national levels, but the local governments. So we look forward to more partnerships, to continuing the conversation, and you can count on us to keep pushing this agenda forward. Thank you.
Fernando, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. I learned a lot because I'm relatively new to the migration scene, so to speak. And I think that your coverage of, especially looking at women and girls as being agents of change in the migration process, I think is quite quite important, but also recognizing the vulnerabilities and the intersectionality of taking a holistic approach to addressing the migrant situation is also quite instructive to all of us who are working in this area. I'd like now to call on our second speaker who has just arrived, Madam Huda. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sure you must have experienced the challenges of getting into the into the forum and then finding our meeting. So I welcome you, and I'd like to recognize the fact that you're best known internationally, at least to me, as the first human rights special rapporteur on trafficking in persons. And throughout your career, you've followed your passion to provide legal assistance to all persons, especially women and children, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, caste, or race. In addition to the organizations that you founded, you've supported the critical situations faced by women, such as acid burning, prostitution, unsafe abortion, trafficking, and other aspects of violence and exploitation. For all of you who are listening or who are participating, Sigma received her law license in 1970 and has been in active practice ever since. Distinguished in her field, she was twice elected to the committee of the Bangladesh Bar Council, which is the statutory body to enroll lawyers and that takes action against lawyers for breaching the code of conduct. She was the chair of the tribunal set up to regulate conduct where her decisions could only be reversed by the High Court. She was twice elected to the Supreme Court Bar Association, and in 1978 represented Bangladesh at the General Assembly meeting. In 1979, which is important to this particular assembly, she assisted in the drafting of CEDAW. She organized a number of high-level meetings related to prostitution and survivors of prostitution. She discussed marital rape at the World Conference on Women held in Nairobi and further attended the Fourth World Conference in Beijing. In the time we have, it's impossible to relate all the landmark decisions and legal cases in which she has shown her leadership. Let it suffice to say that she is a distinguished advocate for women and girls' rights and women's rights, called upon by governments and the United Nations system numerous times to share her intellect, her passion, and her knowledge of women's and children's condition to establish policy that honors their dignity and human rights. So, Madam Huda, the floor is yours.
And thank you, Leslie. May call you Leslie because I can see that name down at the bottom. So we are talking, I mean, I missed the earlier speaker because I was still trying to wrangle all the technical. You see, I'm 1970 product. I don't know the modern technologies and the internet thing. I had to get my nephew to come and help me. Well, we are talking about responses to the policies that are there. I think it's universal when we talk about migrant workers being attacked, when we're talking especially of female migrant workers, where do they go? At least from Bangladesh's point of view, from South Asian point of view, I would say they're mostly going for domestic sectors. They're going for unskilled labor. And they're lowest bottom tier where they don't have any particular skills. So they're just going in as domestic cleaners, maids, or cooks maybe sometimes, and mostly as a caregiver and a cleaner. Now, when the COVID hit, as it is, they were in a very precarious situation earlier to COVID. If you've read and you've seen how many dead bodies come back to the South Asian, even to Philippines, after being abused by their employers in the Middle Eastern countries, in the Gulf states, or even in Hong Kong, or even in Singapore, which is supposed to be a highly developed nation in the Southeast Asian region, or even in the whole world region. Yet the domestic servants have always been at the receiving end of all kinds of abuses and violences, maybe most probably because no one can access a residence, a private residence, to see how they fare. And they are caught in. And when the COVID-19 started, many workers were deported back, and many workers could come out, but the female workers could not come out from that situation of where they were living. They were staying either in the residences and in very precarious situations. As it is, they were facing rape and sexual abuses from their employers. And now they were in that vulnerable position of living in close proximity where everybody is locked in. And then you have, that close proximity by itself is a danger point, which doesn't allow people to, sort of access them and give them help. And they also can't come back because they're locked down. So there's no flights from from the host countries to the, or from the countries of where they're working, from the workplace to their home of their original home. They can't come out. They can't come back. Even if some do come back, then they don't have that same kind of repatriation facilities here. We talk about it. Everybody's talking about it. It's full of newspapers, in today's newspaper also, of what they're planning to do for the migrant workers or returning migrant workers. But still, the women are being neglected there. The children are being neglected there. It's always the persons who are being focused are the migrant workers who are male, who are working in organized industries, dockyards, shipbuilding yards, or wherever they're working. But it's not the women who are working at home, from their employers' home. I mean, so another aspect is that there was one exception case for the first time in the history of Saudi Arabia, or in fact, from the history of the Gulf states, was the case of the employer being punished, given life imprisonment or death sentence for abusing a Bangladeshi female worker. It was her name was Ambia Khatun, and she was killed. She was raped, she was abused, and then she was killed. And because of this, is the first instance in Saudi Arabia, and I laud the justices of Saudi Arabian courts that they did give justice to this poor girl. Other cases may come forward. I'm sure after this, it could be an example. It's a precedent that has been set. So it may be followed by other Gulf states also. But Saudi Arabia has broken the tradition. Before it was inaccessible, and now they have come out. And the second thing is that we recently, in the past 5 years, 477 bodies came back dead. Dead bodies came to Bangladesh, female workers, all female workers. You will see, how do we respond to such a thing? We have to reintegrate them into society. Our government and other governments, I'm sure, are trying their best to, because they are scared to go back. They can't go back. Their boats are burned. So at the most, they can reintegrate themselves by self-reliant jobs. So they are in a very bad shape. They are actually in a bad shape. The women who are migrant workers who have come back with not. So I would say that what we could do, what we find is that hundreds of thousands of workers are being laid off, and these women are also being laid off. I would say that the government has created an emergency fund of 70 million taka, which could, I don't know how much it would be when you convert it into US dollars, but it has towards rehabilitation and offering investment, offering to the returnees investment also to start their own business if they could, at 4% interest. And they have also given immediate relief fund of 10 million takas for the employees who are returning. And even the undocumented workers, they have been given an opportunity to be regularized by the Malaysian employers. They have come forward. They said, okay, fine. And this COVID pandemic period, we will regularize the undocumented workers who have gone there illegally and are working there. And this, I mean, you must also understand there's a fine distinction between being trafficked and migration. The migrant workers find themselves also in a situation of being trafficked. That is also something that we have to think about. We have found that Bangladeshi workers were being very much frequently reported, they were very much being ill-treated during the COVID period. And we are still working for it. That we are trying to work out how to get them back. Because for Bangladesh, these people are very important to be sent back to their states of employment, to the countries of employment, because they bring in a lot of inward remittances. A huge amount of money comes in from these workers, whether they're male or they're female. And these female workers, the males have some sort of an option, But you must understand, when these female workers go, they sell off their properties or they mortgage their properties, and they have no other ways of paying off these properties. So when they go there to the country of employment, they find that they are not being able to even remit those money, and now they're being deported and out of job. Or if they're staying within that country of employment, they're being targeted, they're vulnerable to all kinds of abuses, and there's nobody to take protection. The embassies don't come forward, except for few embassies like Ethiopia or Philippines and Sri Lanka. They have set up homes for the abused women in employment to come and take shelter, so sort of a part-time, partial shelter home, and then they deport them back. These women are reluctant to come back home because they have a lot of debt to pay. They are a burden here, they're a burden there. They really don't know, they're in the no man's land and they don't know what to do about it. So when we talk about what can the country do, what can the nations do, the nations must think about the Convention on the Rights of the Migrant Workers. They must think of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They must think of CEDAW. They must think of the the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and also the ILO conventions that are trying to protect these migrant workers. But it's very difficult to get access. We have to find out recommendations, and I'll give just a few recommendations because you've only given me 10 minutes. I don't know how many minutes have gone trying to warm up my talk.
You
But
have
in
1
any
minute.
case, 1 minute. Hi, Wendy, how are you? So I have, so I would suggest that the women must avail of this reintegration and rehabilitation fund that has been created by the government. They should get access to it. We have a Ministry of Women Affairs. We have a manpower ministry that looks after the manpowers. And we have to urge the women, the overseas employment associations that is there, the Migrant Workers Association. We have 2 or 3 of them in Bangladesh, and they're very active. And they should be geared towards saying that, okay, the rehabilitation funds, the reintegration funds, a certain percentage of it must be geared towards only women, returnee women. So the returnee women should be there. Embassies should be notified that those women who could not come back to Bangladesh or to any other South Asian countries, they should be geared up to providing assistance to them. They should make a list of all the domestic workers who have gone there to work in the residences of the employers. And they must ask the host countries, governments, to ask the employers to report back periodically from they should be accountable for the treatment that they mete out to these workers within their home, whether they're following the labor laws of their country or the international ILO, the International Labour Organization rules that have been set up, the regulations that have been set up. Because unless you do this, unless we don't have an accountability system and we are shrouded in the darkness within the homes, what is happening, we don't know. They don't have any work holidays because they're in the house, especially the Muslim workers. They're in a worse position because they don't, at least the Christian workers can go to the church on Sundays. I've seen that myself as a special rapporteur when I'd been going around. I have seen that the Christian employees could go to church and they had access to the embassy people who were also going to the church. Whereas, on the contrary, the Muslim women say their prayers at home. They don't go to the masjids. So they're not at all going out. They're stuck within the 4 walls of the employer's house to be abused. Even we have had horrendous stories of where the young boys have been inserting forks into their vagina or bottles, can openers into the vagina as a pleasure. I don't know what pleasure, but anyway, these abuses have to be tolerated. They had no way of coming out. I'm glad that Saudi Arabia has made another landmark decision in removing the kafila, the sponsorship. So the employees who feel like leaving, they can leave. They can leave that unhappy job, or they can leave and come out of the country also. They can exit the country.
I think it's really shocking to hear some of the stories that you've just told and just related about their atrocities that have happened to some of the women that have been migrant
But
workers.
there's no accountability because the employers are
And all the
privileged. They're staying within the four walls of the home.
yeah,
And
I think
there's no mechanism as yet to go into
Yeah.
the homes to probe.
Yeah.
The
Well,
question
thank
of
you.
privacy is there.
I do think that the points that you bring up and the fact that the governments really need to have some kind of policies that they can introduce that can assist women in coming back and that can protect them while they're away are very important. But at this point, I to introduce our next speaker. We're going to turn our attention to the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, which serves as the secretariat for the newly constituted UN Network on Migration. And with us today, we have Wen Li, who is the director of the Department of International Cooperation and Partnerships for the IOM, where she's responsible for supporting and coordinating IOM's cooperation with its member states, international organizations, civil society, and the media. And before joining IOM in 2017, she was a Chinese diplomat with 20 years of experience in multinational diplomacy. And she joined the Chinese Foreign Service in 1997 and has worked with the Department of International Organizations and Conferences dealing with human rights and other social issues, and the Department of African Affairs doing policy research and covering issues related to the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. She holds a master's degree from the Foreign Affairs University of China and the Master of International Law from Sydney University in Australia. So Madam, you would have the floor.
Thank you, Leslie. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure to join all of you here in this important side event. As the previous speakers already mentioned, that for many women and girls, migration can be a positive experience. That is an expression of their agency and a vehicle for their empowerment. But at the same time, that migration can also expose them to situations of heightened vulnerability and violation of their rights. COVID-19 has exacerbated migrant women's and girls' vulnerability to gender-based violence, GBV, due to restrictions on movement, economic, psychological stress, curtailed access to health, social, and protection services. This is particularly true for women and girls who are undocumented. And the situation is even worse for those in vulnerable conditions, including those stranded in detention, identification, transit centers, as well as those living in camps. In June 2020, IOM, along with 8 UN agencies, issued an interagency statement on violence against women and girls in the context of COVID-19, calling for integrating measures to address violence against women and girls in COVID preparedness and recovery plans, and ensuring these efforts are adequately resourced. And in this process, it is important to ensure women's participation in decision-making so that their needs and priorities are addressed. And action is also needed to raise awareness and strengthen advocacy about the increased risk of GBV during the pandemic, targeting particularly employers, law enforcement, and social service providers who have an important role to play in preventing and responding quickly to such cases. And it's also essential that victims and survivors have access to services. Such services should be made essential services that remain open during lockdowns, including shifting to the remote modality where possible. And there should be, as Fernando mentioned, there should be a firewall between GBV service providers and immigration authorities so that migrant women with an irregular status can seek service without fear of being reported to immigration authorities. And it's also important that migrant women go so empowered through education, skills training, and employment, which is critical to reduce their vulnerability. Migrant women's role in keeping family and social system running during the pandemic and contributing to sustainable recovery should be fully recognized. And state support measures in response to COVID-19 need to include informal, part-time and seasonal workers, most of whom are women. This is particularly necessary in female-dominated spheres, such as hospitality, food, and tourism sectors. As the leading migration agency, a gender-responsive approach has been mainstreamed in IOM's policies and programs. In line with IOM's institutional framework on addressing gender-based violence in crisis, Since the outbreak of the pandemic, IOM has prioritized continuation of GBV services and support as life-saving and promoted the participation of women's organizations in the development of response plans. For instance, in Cox's Bazar, support has been provided to women in participating in camp governance structure to ensure risks of GBV are identified and women and girls' needs are addressed. IOM has maintained operation of 10 safe spaces for women and girls across 9 camps and the emergency safe shelter for GBV survivors. And in Somalia, where women-owned businesses form a large part of the informal sector that has been badly bruised by the pandemic, IOM, together with partners, are supporting women-led micro and small enterprises to recover from the impact of a pandemic. IOM has also assisted many migrant women who had lost their jobs and have been stranded, as well as the victims trafficking in returning to their countries of origin, as was recently the case with dozens of Ugandan women returning home from the Middle East. The implementation of Global Compact for Migration provides a unique opportunity for member states to ensure that the rights, needs, and situations of vulnerability of migrant women and girls are addressed while promoting their empowerment by putting in place gender-responsive migration policies, laws, programs, and services. Human rights and gender-responsive approaches are cross-cutting guiding principles of GCM. As the coordinator of the UN Migration Network, IOM, together with network members, has been mainstreaming gender in its work. The network is close to finalizing tools to support member states in incorporating GCM, including the gender-responsive approach in their national policies and strategies. The Migration Network Hub, to be officially launched tomorrow, will facilitate discussion and best practice sharing on addressing the gender dimension of migration. The Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund has made the application of the gender marker mandatory for all program proposals and tracks allocation and expenditures on gender equality and women's empowerment. In the early stage of the pandemic last year, the network issued a policy brief on enhancing access to services for migrants in COVID preparedness, prevention, response, and beyond. The network also made joint statements calling for suspension of forced return and detention of migrants, particularly migrant women and children. Over the past year, we have seen encouraging steps taken by some governments in this regard. For example, Colombia has permitted Venezuelan migrants to access healthcare during the crisis. And for those who have lost their jobs, including domestic workers, Portugal and Ireland made policy and legislative changes necessary to ensure they have access to social protection entitlements on par with nationals. So to address this GBV issue in the pandemic, a whole of society approach is essential. Civil society and other stakeholders play a crucial role, particularly in advocacy, dissemination of information, and provision of services. The UN Network on Migration published a statement last summer calling for greater acknowledgement and support to these actors and flexible and fast-tracked funding to civil society organizations and other key stakeholders to address gaps and needs in response to COVID-19. So to conclude, I just want to reaffirm that IOM is committed to working closely with all partners in combating violence against migrant women and girls and addressing the root causes for the benefit of not only the women and girls themselves, but for the entire humanity. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate all of that good work that IOM is doing. A lot of it was not known to me, but certainly the specific instances that you gave of the Somalia, the Colombia situations and others. And also maybe a little bit later, you can tell us a little more about how you're going to launch the, the migration, not the migration fund, but you had a new initiative that's being launched tomorrow. Is that right?
Yeah, Migration Network Hub.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the hub. And I'd be curious to find out a little bit more about that a little later on. But right now, we're going to turn to the response of someone who's working with migrant women directly, which is very nice to hear. So Raquel Verdasco represents the Jesuit Refugee Service in Athens, Greece, as a project technician, and advocacy officer, accompanying asylum seekers, migrants, refugees through the entire asylum process. She's a human rights lawyer with degrees from the Complutense University of Madrid, and
Yes.
I probably said that wrong, and this
Yes, okay.
of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, Greece, where she became a volunteer in the Idomeni, is that correct? In refugee camp, and found her vocation. She completed her studies as a jurist with a course on the challenges Europe is facing in migration policy and management. She's specialized in international development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, and has worked for the Salesian, is that correct?
Yeah.
Jóvenes Desarrollo in Madrid, with the Don Bosco Foundation of Cambodia and the city of Sihanoukville in Cambodia, strengthening the capacities of the local community, especially those in vulnerable groups, with a human rights approach. In Greece, last September, she is reinforcing her advocacy by providing support and a sense of continuous well-being, building hope, restoring human dignity, and strengthening the social and institutional cohesion so necessary to developing resilience and accomplishing change, especially among women and girls during this COVID pandemic crisis. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to you, Raquel. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for this dialogue. I'm so happy to see that this week everyone is talking with the sensitivity and the respect that this topic deserves. I will try to take you closer to the field, closer to Greece, where we are working, and to give voice to all the women who cannot speak by themselves now, and that they don't feel free enough to speak by themselves. Let's hope one day they can do it. As you said, I'm working for the Jesuit Refugee Service here, and we have a Women's Day Center. We came here in 2015 with all the refugee migration crisis and with all the problems we had in the borders. And we are based in Athens, close to Victoria Square. Victoria Square is a place where a lot of migrants, women suffer from sexual harassment and violation of their rights. So I think we are located in a very specific point, in a hotspot of migration. And here in the street, we can really see what's the reality. Okay, as you said before, the COVID-19 only worsened the situation of these women, and it highlights or let see that the situation was already bad before. Now we are talking with women that comes from mostly from Afghanistan, Syria, and Republic of Congo. We also have women from Iran and Iraq, and the situation of these women are very different from one to another. So in my opinion, I would say as a legal advisor that apart also from the holistic vision that we need to see, is that we need to see every woman as a separate women with different needs, because it's not the same women who suffer from violence in Afghanistan or a woman who comes from Congo. We are receiving a lot of claims about the situation right now. I don't know if you are familiar with the situation in Greece, but in March 2020, the government decided not to continue with the procedure of asylum because of the COVID situation. Then some camps were closed. Then the situation of the camps, we already know what's going on. It's not the best for all the women. Some camps are closed due to the COVID measures, so it complicates the access to these women for the basic needs and the basic services. We have a lot of women who couldn't come to our premises when we were still open because they lived quite far or they didn't have the right to come here because due to the restriction of mobility. So as I said before, most of our women comes from Afghanistan and Congo. It's quite different, the reality we see in these two different women. They come from different backgrounds. Also, they have a different concept of what is violence for them. and what is right to express or not right to express according to their culture and their difficulties with the language and the difficulties they face in the journey coming to Europe. What we can see is that Afghani women comes with the whole family, with the husband, they come also with the children. So sometimes the violence is at home in their own family. And what we see, or at least what I see working here, is that the women from Congo comes alone, and sometimes they come already pregnant from what happened before in their countries, or the vulnerabilities they had in their countries. So it's a quite different situation, and I think both of them deserve a particular process and deserve to be listened and understood in the different ways. We are really concerned about the situation now with the NGOs in Greece, because there is a new law working with how can I express this correctly, which is not allowing the work of NGOs. Some NGOs are not working in the field because there is a new registration going on. You have to do a lot of papers, a lot of bureaucracy, and some of the NGOs are closing due to that. And so that's a main problem that we have. Also, as I told you, the women already come with situation of vulnerability, leaving their countries. They have to face so many problems in the coming to Europe. And they had also problems in the borders with the authorities. And of course, is well known what's going on in the camps. That's why there was the fire in Moria in 2020, which show us the real situation about migrants, asylum seekers, or people that want to come for a better life in Europe. Apart from that, I would highlight that apart from the vulnerabilities that they face in their countries, and when they arrive here and through the routes they have to follow, now we had let's say an issue in Athens. There's a lot of migrant population without accommodation. It's very hard for them to find a place to live. I know the government did some policies together with the UNHCR, with the IOM, to improve these measures of accommodation. But it's very hard for some of them to, especially with COVID, to go inside these programs. I know, and talking about good practices, and the government of Greece decided to create different programs, Helios and Estia program for accommodation for the asylum seekers, also to give some cash and some money to the most vulnerable groups. But the problem that we face now with COVID is that it's very hard for the women to follow the procedures, because some asylum offices are closed, some offices to attend to these programs are closed, so they are they are waiting for a response that is not arriving. So some of the women are in the street looking for accommodation, and the risk of violence that they are suffering in the street is quite high. We have women coming to our NGO that were raped close to us in Victoria Square, that comes with the children. They don't have places to go, and it's very hard for them to understand also the situation about COVID, and it's very hard for them to find solution for this. Also, there is a problematic that we are seeing recently, and it's that the schools are closed. So this is a big issue for the women, because as you can see, apart from struggling with the problems of looking for a job in a country with no papers, of the problems of the language, problems of that they don't understand so many things, apart from that, they have to carry their children, and they don't know if they will have a better future for their children. So some of the women who are living in a big accommodation, community housing, are really, really facing with the problem that the schools are closed due to COVID. And since November, 2020, we are closed. And also in our Women Day Center, we try to keep the classes online for the children, but it's very, very hard for them to attend the schools. There is also problematic with the number of teachers that they need and the papers they need. Some of the women, they also need address to register their children in the public education in Greece. So if they are living in the streets, if they are living in the housing accommodation, it's very hard for them. So we have women who wants to come back to the camps because at least there they know people, they know that IOM, UNHCR work has some workshop in education, and at least their children can be at least protected, let's say. So it's very hard for us to see that they come to Athens, but the situation in Athens is not very good for them. So I'm so sad to say that. Okay, so to be more positive, there's so many NGOs working in the field. There are so many good organizations like Diatomia, Melissa, that works together with the government, and they try to do some policies to improve the situation of the migrants. I know they have some policies to get conscious to the population that this problem is going on, and to do some conciliation also about the local people at the migration, because situation in Greece with COVID is not also very good for the local people. So I think it would be very, very useful if the policies can also involve the local population, and we can talk all together and sit all together, because it's a problem to involve everyone. And as I was telling you, we saw some good practices and some good policies that they try to face this COVID situation. We know that the General Secretary of Family Policies, Family Policies and Gender Equality, together with the Atomia, with UNHCR, with UNICEF, they are doing some policies to prevent the gender-based violence, also to make the people understand what it is, also program with different languages so the woman can be informed and they can be conscious of the violence they are facing. And also in the municipality of Athens, they have a helpline, so for the women to call in case they are going through this situation, and they have some counseling places to go that were closed also due to the COVID, but that they try to keep it operating. And okay, I don't have a lot of time. I wanted to say so many things, but I forgot, sorry. Basically, what I see here, I'm also young. I don't have that much experience as the people were talking before me. But what I see here is that there is a very complex situation that is very hard to analyze altogether. That there are so many different realities, so many people coming from so many different countries, so many different cultures, that we really need to focus on that. Now there's a lacking of access to basic services, and only the NGOs and some organizations, UN agencies are also working in that, can cover these needs of the population. And I also see, as we were discussing before, that there are some needs that are not involved in the big pacts that are being taking place. Like, for example, we have the Migration Pact of the European Union that is not yet applied on the field, but we are already concerned about some issues that are not taken into account, and that will be very important for the migrant women, the children, the family reunification, and the process. We are also concerned about the paths, bilateral paths of Greece with other countries like Afghanistan for the voluntary returning. And we are concerned about the new list of safe countries of origin that Greece also uploaded. I think they consider Bangladesh, Pakistan as countries of safe origin. So we don't know how this will affect to the women, how this will affect to the procedure. And I think that's all for me.
Great. Well, thank you. Oh,
Yeah, if
sorry.
you have further questions, sorry, if you have further questions, I will be so happy to answer. I forgot to say so many things, but I hope we can dialogue together.
But Raquel, I think you've given us
Thank
a
you.
really good picture of how complex it is to try to deal with the refugees and where they come from and how to handle them and what their backgrounds are. I think that was a very valuable presentation on your part in terms of being able to educate us as to what it's like on the field, in the field, I should say. Right now, I think we have about 20 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, where we can go to questions. I think all of the observations from all of the panelists have been really revealing and very interesting. So I'd like to call the panelists back and turn things over to Maria Des to bring up the questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. And if you want to put it in the chat, you may also do that, and you can put comments in the chat as well. So without any further ado, Maria Des will call on the first three questioners.
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised, but I can read some questions now from the chat box.
Okay.
The first one from Ruth of CCA. Amidst COVID-19, we must not forget access to a very basic service for migrant workers in host countries. How are we ensuring migrants are receiving correct and up-to-date information from official channels in their own native languages? Language barriers can exacerbate information asymmetries.
Is there something
So do you want me to read three questions and then let our panelists answer?
I apologize. That was what we agreed, yeah.
And then another question, do we have any data on the number of new shelters, camps for migrant women made available during COVID-19? How have these shelters or camps coped with the distancing or isolation requirements to avoid the spread of virus? Any best practices or innovations in this space? And then the third from Paulus Ramat, are there any example or model in any country that migrant women are agent of change for the receiving country? Okay, that's all.
Okay, so I think we've got three very interesting questions. Is there, let's see, why don't we start with you, Wenli? Usually people start at the beginning and the end of the panelists. So this time we'll start in the middle, and you can choose which question you'd like to answer.
Okay, on information sharing, I think that's a very important issue. For IOM, that we work both closely with government authorities and with migrants themselves in order to ensure that the dissemination of correct information to migrants. For instance, in camps like Cox's Bazar, we work with local communities and particularly women and girls in educating or spreading the information to for women and girls about what are risks and what are the measures that they could take and what are the services that are available they could seek. And also for the shelters, because IOM is working across the regions in more than 150 countries. So I don't have the exact number for the new shelters at hand, but I can share later if possible. But what I can say that for those shelters that IOM is using those shelters to provide social and psychological support to women and girls, and particularly in times of this restricted movement and other restrictive measures to control the virus spread of virus. And also at the same time that we use this safe space and shelters to provide training to women and girls, so that either for maybe IT literacy or some labor skills, so that it's also used as a way to empower women and girls to reduce their vulnerability. And of course, also all this shelters and safe spaces are managed in line with the COVID control regulations and policies made by the authorities, including social distancing and other protective measures. And the language barrier, IOM has been working with local communities to provide actually information in local languages. For instance, in some countries in Africa and in Asia, that we have been making sure to spread the information sometimes through the public radio, and sometimes through by using the support from the volunteers from the local communities. Yes, that's some of the practice of IOM.
Stigma, you look like you were starting to say something a minute ago.
Who, me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. No, I was just trying to say that IOM in Bangladesh is working only with the restricted group. They're not working with all the returning migrant workers, female migrant workers. They are concentrating in Rohingya and Cox's Bazar, she herself is saying. But when I was making my presentation, I was talking about those women who have been sent, have gone either through agencies or otherwise irregular, whichever way, or trafficked. They have gone into the countries, the receiving countries, and have been working there as domestic labor. When they come back, they're unprotected. I was talking about them being unprotected, then rather having the refugees who have come into the, I may be wrong when Lee could explain that if she has to, but they came into, they were working in the camps that have been set up in Cox's Bazar for the Rohingyas specifically, and not otherwise in the other parts of Bangladesh, because all are not going to Cox's Bazar. Most of the women who come in, who are trafficked, and are coming from the lower, poorer parts of Bangladesh, which could mean the river coast also, which could mean northern districts of Bangladesh, which faces famine, and which is less now. The famine is not there anymore, but the dry season is there. We are now going through a dry season where there won't be any rain for quite some time till the rainy season comes in, till April 15th or so. So this 1 month we'll have a very hot and dry season where the crops also don't grow. So of course our government is trying very hard to sort of make a crops by rotation that can withstand the heat and all. So in those circumstances, the women who go there to work in Middle East or in Singapore, or even when our government was sending them to Hong Kong, that is a time where, these women, when they come back, they get merged into the majority, into the society, but they're still an outcast if they do come back, because they have come back with horrendous stories. They come back unsheltered, unprotected. Some people, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, and some people have good employers, but in most cases, we have found, like during this pandemic only, we had 77 bodies come back. 77 dead bodies came back from the Middle East. So you can understand that.
Really for that, yeah.
Yes, so you can understand when IOM is talking, are they talking about the whole entire Bangladesh population, or they're talking about a concentrated camp in Cox's Bazar? Even the adjoining area of Chittagong, have they been addressing that? No, I don't think so. So, what I was going to say in those questions is, I don't know whether you can give a change agent, except for that one case I told you about in Saudi Arabia, where the employer was brought to justice. Is an exception to the rule. So that could be a agent of change in future for other people who are in this dire situations. They could also seek access to justice. They could seek remedy in the court of law. So that could be a breakthrough. That could be an agent of change, that particular decision itself, I would say. And then, of course, you have the language barrier somebody has brought it. That is very, very important for us. So when I talk about One question was of agent of change. One was, is there any model that one can follow? It's very difficult to follow a model here in these circumstances where when we are talking not of the ordinary migrant workers in organized industries, organized labor fronts, we are talking about migrant workers within the four walls of a home. Most of the women and children, they're not nurses. Most of the women and children are not doctors. And we have a minimum age of employment that is 25 years, and some India has 35 years. But nevertheless, people are going with duplicate forged documents showing a 13-year. We had a case of a 13-year-old girl, two cases, in fact, of 13-year-old girl and a 14-year-old girl who had gone showing themselves to be above 25. Then the immigration authorities could control it because they're seeing them, they're going through them. Whether this girl is a 13-year-old or she's a 25-year-old. Minimum age is 25. So these are the things that our governments have been failing.
Well, thank you very
The
much.
immigration authorities.
I can see where Raquel has her hand up and she's really anxious to share something. And after that, I want to get Helen
Yeah,
for
of course.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I would like to say that I agree with Sigma. I don't know if I pronounce this right about the language barrier. We see it every day, and apart from the language is the concept that we give with our language, like different. We learn since we are little, and since we learned our language, the concept. So it's very hard for us to explain the situation to some women what is going on. Here we have some interpreter of Farsi for the Afghani women and Arab interpreter, but we have so many nationalities and it's very hard. Also, the main authorities in Greece, they talk in Greek. So it's very hard for them to communicate. But I would love to say that it's true that in the hospitals, most of the women, they can have, and not only the women, but the people, they can have a translator. So they can have access to the healthcare system, at least in the emergencies. In the public hospitals, they have interpreter, sometimes cultural mediator, and but it's a problem that they have to face also. And also, I would like to say that I don't know. I saw the last question, and I think all the weight of the pandemic is on the women's now, because they really have to carry on so many things in their shoulders, and I think that's my answer. They have to take care of the children. They have to find jobs. They have to learn new languages in order to communicate. They have to follow long procedures to get the asylum recognition. So yeah, that would be my answer. That I think all the weight is on them. And all we know, because now we work in Athens, but we have so many people who comes from the camps, not only in the islands, but also closer to Athens. We know that the IOM and the UNICEF and UNHCR, they have some programs for the women in Greece. And I would like to highlight that I think at least they are trying to solve the situation or to help the women.
Thank you.
That's all.
Fernando, for the last comments, and then we'll go to the next three questions. That will probably be the last we can manage in this time frame. Go ahead, Fernando.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you for the great questions. I think many of them have been answered, as was just mentioned by Raquel with regards to the language and access to basic services. The way you ensure it is the way that it's being done in the field, which is the civil society organizations stepping in and providing those translators. In some cases, you can count on consular authorities to assist, and some governments may have the resources to provide information in foreign languages, but there may not be the political will to do so due to a flawed perception that providing information in a foreign language will encourage a greater public charge on whatever services is being offered. Here, what's fundamental is to distinguish between certain services and those basic services that are essential for fulfilling the human rights obligations of states. And in the case of access to basic services, we have a solid guide in the Global Compact that says that they need to be gender responsive and that they need to be provided whenever possible in a language that migrants understand. Until we have universal capabilities and political will to do that, it is an area ripe for intervention for civil society and partners to assist in making that link. And with regards to the agents of change question, I think that I'll just give one example of, in the context of the pandemic, many of our Mexican community in the United States has exhibited some vaccine hesitancy because of all of the disinformation that is out there with regards to the vaccine, but also because in some of the vaccination spots, you see either law enforcement or military, kind of doing their job. And there's no indication whatsoever that getting a vaccine would lead to a removal or a deportation or a report to immigration authorities. However, because of the stigma that is already assigned to local law enforcement in those jurisdictions that are hostile environments for migrants, there's that vaccine hesitancy. So what we've done in some cases is we've been able to have the consulates themselves become vaccination centers. And we work with women community leaders to go out and use their own networks within the community to say, it's safe. Not only can you accede to the vaccine, but you should. And so it's a way of combating disinformation using the networks that migrant women themselves have developed and created over the years. And I think that's an example of them being agents of change.
Thank you. Ritas, can you?
Yes,
Tell me.
there's only one hand raised at the moment and no other questions in the chat box. So maybe we can ask Wangari Tharao to unmute your microphone and turn on your video if you want to.
So my name is Wangari Tharao, and I'm not going to turn on my video because I'm recovering from COVID-19, and I look like something the cat dragged in from outside on a rainy day.
Oh.
So I'm not going to do that. So I have a couple of points that I actually need to make. As you can tell from my name, I'm a migrant. I've lived in Canada for many years, and I work in an organization where we provide primary healthcare services for immigrant, refugee, non-status women from Africa, from the Caribbean, from South Asian countries, and from Latin America. And we have been in the middle of COVID, the fight of COVID since the beginning because of the populations that we're actually working with. Most migrant women tend to work in essential services. So most of them, they're either frontline workers in grocery stores, or they are working in hospitals in whatever capacity as cleaners, and as healthcare workers. And data in Canada actually shows that migrant women or women of color share one of the largest burdens of COVID-19. Because of where they work, they lost their jobs. So they're having there's a lot of food insecurity, housing insecurity, because people can no longer afford to pay rent, or they can't afford to buy food for their families. And when we switched on services to go online, we are expecting people to have a smartphone, so you can actually hook up and get your services through that modality. But the thing is, you have to be able to pay for a smartphone, pay for airtime, and because you have lost your job, people are not able to do that. So even provision of health services has become so problematic to be able to reach women. So, and I think people on the ground, some of the speakers have raised the issue around there are a lot of migrant women who are actually now becoming caregivers in their homes. They cannot social isolate because they live in small spaces. So when one has COVID, it is likely that everybody else in the household is going to be exposed to COVID. So we have to really start thinking about how do we ensure that we are protecting women? How do we ensure that we are providing services that can actually reach women wherever they are? Thinking about language, and how can we highlight some of the work that is actually happening on the ground within migrant infrastructure networks, where they're actually dealing with some of these issues for their communities. And I think one of the pieces I'd like to actually discuss, to be discussed here, is that we have these organizations that are doing all this work and have probably developed best practices how to do it, but we never highlight them. In this meeting, we're talking about empowerment of women so that they can be their own spokespersons. So when are we ever going to empower migrant women? So when we come to presenting in a forum like this, that we can hear that first voice of what they're actually doing on the ground. For me, that's one piece. The question that I have, and this is, I think it's for the only man on the panel. The Global Compact for Migration must have been ratified by a whole bunch of countries. And I'm sure most of the Western countries were probably some of those who ratified. Is there an accountability mechanism built in it so that they can actually report back and say the type of support they are providing for migrants, particularly during these challenging times of COVID? I think that's really important to ensure that we actually understand what is it they're responsible for and how responsive are they to what they're expected to be doing. So I'll stop at that.
And that comment. And I think, Fernando, the question was definitely pointed toward you. We have about 1 minute for each person. So Fernando, if you went to that question and give your final comments, and then we'll go to Wendy and to Raquel and finish with Sigma Huda. If that would be all right with everybody, then let's proceed. Go ahead, Fernando.
Sure. Okay, in 1 minute. So countries do not ratify the Global Compact for Migration because, and this is important, it's not a treaty. It's not legally binding. If we were to have tried to develop a treaty, it would have undermined the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their families. And also, we would be negotiating for the next 15 to 20 years. Instead, the Global Compact is a cooperative framework, which is not legally binding, but very much politically binding. And there is an accountability mechanism built in the form of regional reviews that have reports, and these regional reviews take place every 4 years, but also every 4 years on the off year is the International Migration Review Forum, taking place in May 2022. This is the primary space for member states and the stakeholders to report on the implementation of the Global Compact, on the gaps of the challenges, the opportunities, the success stories, the good practices. And this forum is meant to become the center of gravity for all of the discussions surrounding migration at the United Nations. That is the accountability mechanism. That is where we should all be focusing our energies towards. And once again, thank you to all of the organizers and for all of you for attending. A great pleasure.
And thank you so much. But Wendy, I thought you might want to say something about the network.
Yeah, this GCM is non-binding, as Fernando said. It's non-binding international cooperation framework. But over the past 2 and more years, since the adoption of this document, we have seen very strong support from member states and stakeholders. For instance, in the network, we initiated a so-called champion country initiative last year. And despite of the challenge of COVID-19, we have now had 20 champion countries who volunteer to be play a leading role in implementing GCM commitments. For instance, Colombia and Portugal, which I mentioned in my presentation earlier, are among those champion countries who took steps in making innovative practice and measures to improve services which for the GBV survivors. And many other countries have also adopted good steps, good practice in implementing GCM. And also I mentioned just now that this Migration Network Hub, which is an online platform in response to the call of the GCM to enhance or support peer-to-peer learning and knowledge management on migration. So we are building this an online platform to encourage communications and interactions and the experience sharing amongst member states, agencies, and all stakeholders. And also this network, this hub will serve as a repository of global knowledge on migration. So users can access to all kinds of information and data on migration. Through this, we hope that we can also help spread the knowledge and best practice among all stakeholders and to encourage or strengthen the momentum of GCM implementation.
And that's going to be launched tomorrow, as you said, so people can watch for that. Maybe we'll have some further information coming through the forum or perhaps through this CSW. Then also, I think, Raquel, maybe you want to just give very brief comments about some of the comments that the others have said and what you expect to see coming out of IOM's involvement in Greece in particular.
Okay, thank you very much first for this invitation. And yes, I think I wish I could have the answers for all the questions they raised here and all the comments they did. I think NGOs and social society, civil society should be here to support and to raise the voice of the ones who can't speak. But it's also together with the authorities and with the governments, the one who should provide also and who should enrich the rights of the people. So they are really responsible of so many things that are going on here. And then to finish, I would like to thank for the job that the IOM, UNICEF, the UN agencies are doing. I think they are really helping some women. At least it was the message we received from them. They are very happy about some workshop that they did in the camps about the languages they learned from volunteers in the camp. And we hope the situation gets better. The school can be open so the kids can have at least education and can be with people on their age and can have a space for recreation. So the women can also be able to develop themselves. And yes, I would like to highlight that for us is a big issue, the access to the services, to the basic services, and also the special needs of every woman, that we need to have a holistic perspective, but also together with a particular perspective of what is going on. I think it's a right to every woman to have individual attention and to have an individual procedure, both legal and social. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And
thank you very much.
Give Sigma Huda the last word.
Okay, the last word.
Yes.
Well, I would first of all like to thank Federico, if I may, for talking about the Global Compact on migration. It's a very important platform that has been created. We didn't hear much about it in Bangladesh, but obviously we must be, at least the government must be knowing about it. And my only query was that Global Compact has been talking about the roots and the framework that they have worked on from 2018. We would also, the stakeholders, if they mean stakeholders, means the migrant returnees, if they mean the migrants in abusive conditions, or if they mean the governments or the agencies that are participating in sending the migrant workers, or since we're talking about migrant workers in my case, and we could be talking about other migrants also who are not workers but who have migrated to another country, like somebody said, I'm from Canada. So obviously, if you talk of migrants of a whole, I don't think everybody knows about the compact, the Global Compact, and it should be most disseminated to people. I request him to let it be a public information booth so that we all, the stakeholders could come in, or even the agencies that are protecting the rights of the migrants could come in, and also be a talk, at least in the 2022 meeting, we could send in our suggestions. That is one thing. And when he was talking about the hub, we'd like to know more about the hub and how do we link it. I think somebody else also had raised this pose. I saw it in the chat line that posed this question, that how do we link to the hub? So it's very important if we all want to work in a coordinated way, and we do have to, because I'm talking of those forces that are hidden from the law, hidden from behind a veil, because they're in the private areas, in the private residence. When we talk of migrants as a whole, we can talk of migrants in the forefronts. We can talk of migrants in the work, in the labor industry. We can talk of migrants in the hospitals. We can talk of migrants at offices or in the public workforce. But in the private workforce, which is the migrants, at least from South Asian countries, Indonesia and Philippines and Somalia and Ethiopia, those are the countries that go in to supply women to take care of homes, take care of. So these are the people I would like to know, that how we do access them and how do we bring them into this purview of the compact, of the Global Compact.
Going to be kicked out.
And I would like to thank, and last of all, I would like to thank Leslie, you, Maridos, and everybody, especially my friend from Bangladesh, from Zonta, Rubina Farooq, who introduced me to your.
Thank you. And thank
You
you.
introduced you to me and invited me to address this meeting. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you all my thoughts, a little bit of the thoughts, not all, but anyway.
Well, I think we've
And
all
thank
been
you all, everybody.
very, very pleased with this panel, and it certainly has enriched my thinking about migration and about how the UN and all of the governments and individuals are approaching what's going on. And I thank you all for coming and for attending, and to the organizers for organizing everything. I know we're going to be cut off in just 1 minute, so it's time. We ran 10 minutes over, and I thank the NGO CSW for not kicking us out too early, because those last comments were quite worthwhile.
Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon and good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.